I will call this meeting to order for February the 20th at 5:34. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? No, we don't. Sorry. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. We have one set of minutes from February 1st. There's a couple of items flowing from there. First is a correction on page 14. There was a motion by Councillor Martin that it be recommended to Council that $2,000 be granted to the Vancouver Island Film and Media Commission as an amendment to the original motion. That was actually defeated, not carried. So the actual amount that was ultimately passed by committee was in the amount of $1,000. Your Worship?
A couple of spelling errors in that report too, if you want, page 10 and page 14.
Okay. Perhaps just let staff know what they are and we can figure it out.
Amanda, page 10 on the motion for Creatively United for the Planet. Probably not a plant. And then on page 14, the recommendation for the Island Sexual Health Society. Just got a transpose of letters on that one.
Great, thank you. And just to give committee a heads up that after we adopt these minutes that I'll be asking for another motion to increase the grant and aid budget by a certain dollar amount as a result of our freewheeling at our last meeting. So if there are no other changes, can I have a motion to adopt the minutes?
That in the papers, by the way, our freewheeling spending.
We are very controlled. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes or adopt the minutes for February 1st as amended? Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Can I have a motion to, so the original motion that we had passed right off the bat last meeting was that we set a grant and aid budget of $28,824. In fact, we decided to increase that amount throughout the evening. So the Director of Finance is requesting that we have a motion that would increase the grant and aid budget by $8,526 to match the amount that the committee had tentatively approved last meeting. So can I have a motion to that effect, please?
So moved.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. We have a couple of presentations tonight. The first one is from Cynthia Wright, the Deputy Assessor from Bucy Assessment Authority. Cynthia, welcome. We love these.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go.
Yes, thank you for having us, Your Worship, Honourable Council members. We're pleased to come out, be invited to come out again and present on the assessment role for 2017. With me, I have the Assessor for the Vancouver Island region, Tina Ireland, with me as well. So just want to reiterate a little bit about us and our service commitment to you. So, we want to be open and transparent and fair and accurate, timely and accessible, knowledgeable and respectful, innovative and collaborative. So those are the values we bring and hope to exhibit, in all of our interactions with you. And for those of you who aren't aware, BC Assessment has been around for quite a few years, and we were enacted in 1974 under the Assessment Authority Act, and this was in response to the need for a fair, independent organization to value all properties within BC. At that time, assessments were done by most municipalities within the province, and jurisdictions were done differently, and they weren't necessarily fair. They were, some didn't change. They're all done differently. It was really hard for property owners to understand, what their assessment really meant. So the Assessment Authority Act came into place in 1974 to bring assessments to market value, which really helps the property owners understand what their property assessment should be, as well as for municipalities. It brings that stability to the taxing base, and as well just brings that separation between taxes and assessments. So it's more independent, and there's less perception of there being a conflict. So we have a board of directors and CEO, which are appointed by cabinet, and Peter Fassbender is our current Minister of Community, Sport, and Cultural Development, which we're under. So we produce the assessment roll, and what this is an annual list of property values. As you can see from the photograph there, it used to be a handwritten, kind of document that you used to receive. Technology has certainly helped us, and it's much better to get it on the computer and digital now. This past year, we had over 2 million properties with a total value of $1.68 trillion on the assessment roll within the province. And it identifies ownership, value, classification, and exemptions for each property. And as I mentioned before, it provides that nice stable base, for taxing authorities and governments to raise over $7 billion in property taxes each year. So it is important to understand that the assessment roll is predicated on, a few key dates. So we are setting market value as of July 1st of last year for this current assessment roll. So July 1st, 2016. But that does, based on the physical condition date of October 31st. So for example, if you have a house being constructed, we would be taking that construction date as of October 31st, whatever condition that was in, and valuing it as if it was July 1st. As well, we reflect all of the land title changes as of November 30th. So that is the information that would be the assessment roll would be in, as well as any, and then we mail the assessment notices on December 31st, as well as any tax changes. So, if there's an exempt property that becomes taxable, we would also reflect that as of December 31st. So we do value different properties differently. So market value, as I mentioned, as of July 1st. So the majority of residential properties will be based on their market value, which would be valued using a direct comparison approach. And commercial properties are typically valued using an income approach, based on their rental potential. But there are a few legislated type properties. And these are, farms, major industrial improvements, as well as utilities. So from a very high level, the 2017 provincial assessment roll highlights, as I mentioned previously, it was 1.06% higher for total properties. And we had just over 2 million on the roll this year. The total value on the roll increased 25%, so it was up to $1.68 trillion. And non-market change overall in the province was up 24% from 2016. And that was at $25.2 billion in the province. So how does this compare to Colwood? Overall, properties increased to 6,100 properties, which was a 3.3% increase in total properties in Colwood. And overall, the assessment increased 13.5% to $3.79 billion. And the non-market change increased 26% overall and was at $101 million last year. So it's important to recognize, that while the total values on the assessment roll are important, how we classify the property, really is how the taxes get distributed. So we do have 9 property classes where we classify property. As you can see, there's residential, utilities, supportive housing, major industry, light industry, business and other, managed forest, recreational and nonprofit. So just wanted to look at how the assessment roll breaks down into these various property classes. So as you can see, the majority of the assessed value is in the residential property class at almost $3 billion. And then the next closest is in the class 6, business and other, at $200 million. So how does this relate to you and the taxes? Well, it's a formula. Assessed value, which is determined by BC Assessment, times the tax rate, which is set by you, the municipality, which equals the taxes payable, which is paid by your taxpayer. So the total folios, as you see here, they have been steadily increasing over the last 10 years. And they're at 4,800 folios in 2006, up to 6,100 folios this year. Again, if we look at the net general taxable value, and the net general is net of any exemptions. So this is the value the assessed value that is directly related to what you would be setting your mill rates on and the taxes you would be collecting. So again, as you can see here, the net general taxable value has generally been fairly stable for 3 years, and then the last 2 years it has been increasing with the 13% increase this year. If we look at it again residentially, this is where the majority of the value is in Colwood. You can again see it's following a very similar trend. So non-market change, what is this? This is the value from new construction. Now this may be new construction as in, a brand new house, brand new strata complex, new business being constructed, or it could be through renovations or that type of subdivisions, that type of thing that's occurring in the municipality. So again, over the last 5 years, 2014, we did see a decrease in the non-market construction. And, it has been, increasing slightly over the last few years, which makes sense with, how the market has been changing over the last few years. And again, if we look at the non-market change for all of the property classes, we do see a steady increase over the last few years. And interesting to note, some of the new construction that we've seen in Colwood, you have the Royal Bay, which was quite large over this past year, with the subdivision going in, the new houses being constructed. Looking forward to, we'll have Colwood Corners, that'll be getting underway this year. Ocean Grove is, continuing. We have, seniors housing at Whale Road, getting underway. We have Iliera being constructed on Souk Road there, Island Highway. So all of those properties are contributing to our non-market change. So exemptions. I alluded to this earlier. There are properties that do receive exemptions. And these exemptions are an exemption from paying property tax. There are several types of exemptions. Some are permissive, and permissive exemptions are those that the council would approve each fall to be exempt from municipal taxes. So examples of those could be, on church properties for their hall or surrounding lands, various nonprofit type properties that are looking for some tax relief. There's also statutory exemptions, and those would be, for municipal-owned properties, schools, again, worship area of churches. Those are all examples of statutory type of exemptions. So each year we have an inquiry and complaint process, and the inquiry period starts in January, where we mail the assessment notices, go out, December 31st. And then we have a month where, we encourage property owners to contact, us at Bucy Assessment if they have any questions regarding their property assessment. We have a deadline for appeal, which is January 31st. And then all the appeals go before the Property Assessment Review Panel from February 1st through March 15th. And then we produce a revised roll for the municipality, which is then used to, determine the mill rates each year. If property owners are not satisfied at the Property Assessment Review Panel, they do have the option to appeal to a further level of review at the Property Assessment Appeal Board. There's a fee to proceeding, so, there's a little bit of a cost to do so. And the deadline for that appeal is April 30th. Any properties that are appealed to the Property Assessment Review Board, we are in contact with the City of Colwood to discuss any risk to roll that might be out there, so that you are aware of any significant risk for your financial purposes. Should an appellant or property owner be unsatisfied at the Property Assessment Review Appeal Board decision, they can appeal further to BC Supreme Court, BC Court of Appeal, or the Supreme Court of Canada. Those appeals, though, can only be on a point of law. So, it can't just be, I'm not happy with the value of my property. There has to actually be a point of law where they can proceed to that level. So 2017 risk to roll. So this is what is before the Property Assessment Appeal or Review Panel currently. There are 63 properties in total that have been appealed by the public. And, there's 40 properties where, either the property owner, typically the property owner's brought forward an issue where we've said, yeah, we agree. So perhaps the condition of the property, wasn't, as we thought, or there could be even a late subdivision, or ownership type property that we're processing through PARP as well. So how does this compare? So what does this mean? So 63 properties is 1% of the total folios within Colwood. This is an increase from the 56 appeals we received in 2016. Those properties represent $96 million worth of value on the assessment roll, or 2.53% of the total assessed value. That doesn't mean that that is actually at risk. That's just the total value, and just for comparison purposes. And again, that's an increase from 2016. Yeah. Yes, good catch. So and of that, the 10.3 million is non-residential. So typically that'll be class 6, although not all of it. And then 85.7 million of that is residential. So over the past 5 years, rural stability is important to BC Assessment and is one of our, one thing we're very concerned about in providing the municipality. So as you can see here, it has been, relatively stable, under 0.5%, every year for the last 5 years. Our website has a lot of information on it if you want any additional information. We have our customer services, eValue BC, and a lot of various government tools on there. One thing, we have been working with the City of Colwood is getting electronic building permits, so that we'll get the electronic building permits coming or electronically to us and uploading into our system. So we're currently working on that initiative with the municipality and hoping, electronic building plans come down the road too. So there's our eValue BC. You can just type in an address, pulls up lots of information. You can compare the inventory on your house, look at neighbors, get comparable sales. And there's some additional resources there if anyone wishes. Property Assessment Review Panel, Appeal Board, Homeowner Grants, Property Tax Deferments. And thank you for having us here today. If there's any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Cynthia. First, I'll open it up to the public if you have any questions or comments before we come to committee. No? Seeing none, we'll committee. Rob?
Thank you. Going back to the risk to roll, can you, and I'm just curious about Colwood, so I don't really care about anybody else. Yep. Of the 96 million, what is the normal percentage that's actually usually at risk? I understand that that's the whole amount.
Yeah.
But what are we like? Is there basically a ballpark? Like, is it usually 5 to 10% of that? Is it 20% of that? What's the normal? Do you guys have any stats on that?
I don't.
Okay.
I could give you some more accurate numbers, and there are a couple of big properties within that $96 million.
And it's staying on the same level of risk to roll, with the numbers increasing just slightly. But it seems as though, like if I understand these numbers correctly, we went from 56 properties that were under appeal in 2016 to 63. So really, we're only talking about 6 additional properties, but we're talking about a 50% increase in dispute value. Yeah. So I'm trying to reconcile. So because it does sound like it is a couple big properties that are.
Yeah, I can provide that information to you after.
Okay.
There are a few big properties that are under appeal and could potentially provide some bigger risk going forward.
And is there anything on the municipal side, excuse me, through the chair, is there anything on the municipal side, on our side of the table, that we could be doing differently to mitigate the risk to roll?
Yeah, not offhand that I can think of, but certainly if anything does come up, we'd be more than happy to communicate that. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia?
Just, pardon me, also only really concerned with the Colwood statistics, but for farm status, is the entire property taxed at a separate level, or is only the portion that's used for the farm?
That's a good question.
So the land would be assessed using regulated rates, and that would be the portion used for the farm. And then depending on how the buildings are used, whether they're used for the farm or residentially, they do qualify for an exemption.
So where there's a farm property and there's a residential home on the farm property, the residents would pay the same taxes as any other residents?
Didn't quite follow your question. Are you the
So-
taxes or the valuation of the property?
Well, I'm just wondering whether they're taxed on their house as a farmhouse differently than as the house next door where they don't have a farm.
Yeah, they would get an exemption on the house.
Okay.
If they were the farmer of the property, there's an exemption that goes with it. I can certainly provide you with some more details, on the farm exemptions and regulations, if you would.
Yeah, I'd really like to understand it because, I want to be sure that I have nothing against a farm, but I don't want a development property masquerading as a farm.
Thank you. Just following up on that, the farm. How often are they reviewed? Because I see there's one farm in Colwood. I think I know where it is, and if it's the one I'm thinking of, the landowner had passed away a couple of years ago. So I'm wondering if the farm is actually continuing as a farm, and whether we need to review it to see if that use is still.
Yeah, there's a number of triggers that would occur for a farm review. So a sale is one of them. So typically if someone passes away, there is some sort of land type transfer, usually to an estate or an heir, and that would trigger a review of the property. Depending on the income levels of the farm, then that would also trigger a review. We have different, depending on how much income. If they're making $100,000, it's going to be a less frequent review of the property than if they're making $5,000.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, thank you. Cynthia?
I had understood that, at least in other municipalities, they had to apply annually to get their farm status, but that's not the case? No. Okay, thank you.
Director of Finance.
If there's no other questions from council, I just wanted to, for council's benefit, thank BC Assessment. We do work very closely with them as staff behind the scenes, and they are always extremely helpful. Cynthia is relatively new here. She actually is a Colwood resident, and Triangle Mountain, I believe. And she has dropped into the office a number of times to provide some hands-on training for our staff, because everything now is accessing all this information by the database. There's been some major changes, and she's been there to help us out. And she's also been working with us, meeting with the federal representatives over our PILT appeal, because going forward, we don't want to have that happen again. So that's something I want to get a further follow-up on, because we did have a tripartite meeting with the feds and BC Assessment to try and get some agreement on some of those properties that continue to be a little bit contentious. So thank you very much. Very professional. Just as an example, this year, because we did see such a increase in assessed values in Colwood, Cynthia contacted us well before the assessment statements went out and said, would you like to coordinate some communication on this, which was fantastic, because that allowed her to work with Sandra, so that when those assessment notices hit the mail, some people look at that and they go, oh my goodness, I've gone up 15%, my taxes must be, and our phone starts ringing off the hook. So communicating with us and coordinating our communication really cut down, and it did, on the number of phone inquiries directed our way about people not liking their assessed values, and gave us an opportunity to explain our side of the story as well. You did mention about the initiative for electronic building permits, and we are having our IT manager work with some folks in their back end. It's to our benefit as well to get that information on the roll as quickly as possible to capture the value of new construction, and it is based on the building permits, right? So this is just another initiative of something that we're working on together, which you may not be aware of, and just it is really nice once a year when BC Assessment reps such as Cynthia come and speak to us and answer our questions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Lots in the hopper for sure. It's probably one of the most interesting statistical presentations that we get during the budget process. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next item on the list is a presentation from Sue Dickson, who's the Manager of Finance and Administration, West Shore Parks and Recreation Society. Sue, welcome back. And so I'll just a bit of a caveat. Our two West Shore Parks and Rec directors are allowed to stay for the presentation, as I understand it. They won't be in a conflict, but what is would be a bit of a challenge, as I understand, is if we wanted to ask questions, and at that point, our two directors would need to leave the meeting, and we would actually lose quorum. Pardon?
We're not doing any decisions.
No. So with that, Sue, over to you.
Hey, so thought I'd open with a nice picture from a couple of weeks ago. We don't often get a picture of the West Shore Parks and Rec in the snow. Kind of glad that's over with. So to move this one. So getting into our budget, our revenues, okay, actually decreased from last year by about 3%. And a lot of that was, or portion of that was the Grand Slam that we had in 2015. We didn't host in 2016, so it would go down. 2017, I should say. Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay, the Grand Slam was the big curling event that we hosted in 2016. So we had increased revenues and, of course, increased expenses. So just explaining why our revenues have gone down, that was a large part of it, was not having the Grand Slam. Our pool revenues also decreased, and that's from the competition from the Y. We've got the new rec center now on the block. So our revenues have been impacted to a certain extent. With the pool, a lot of that was to do with swim lessons, and we also had a reduction in salaries because we didn't hire the instructors. Our community recreation programs increased. That was due to our neighborhood learning centers and lots of extra programming. So that has been growing. And there was some other growth in other program areas. So to move, oh, okay, I should be touching that. Okay. So here are our expenses. So our operating expenses was an increase of $88,000 from last year. We estimated for our salaries a 1% QP increase. We're wondering whether that might have been a bit low. We don't usually get what we know what our rate is until the second year into the contract. So we would adjust that in our next year's budget when we would know the amount. We also had a lot of increases just in all of our benefit rates, or the employer portion of the benefit rates, and also just our standard CPP, et cetera. They all increased. But we did see a big decrease in utility bills, especially in hydro and natural gas. I'll be showing you a slide later on. And we have a decrease of about $100,000 in major repairs. So that's kind of the chart of our expenses. So you can see that salaries really is the major cost driver for us at almost 67%. And then that was followed by the utilities and maintenance. Programming costs, really supplies for operating, and our administration. Food and beverage, fairly small. So our total major repairs is $844, and of that, only about $500,000 is funded by requisitions, and the rest comes from reserve. Some of the major projects is the heat reclamation system. That's what we're using, the energy that we used to cool the arena that will eventually go to heat the pool. So we've done part of it in the last years. We've replaced a lot of boilers, and we'll be finishing that in 2017. Air handling unit replacements, some flooring replacements, the Belmont lacrosse box, and a pump station. So just we're always maintaining our site, and we never usually have too many big surprises. Municipal requisitions. Here you can see that the net change from last year is 77,000. So that was a fairly low increase, less than from 216, from 215. Langford pays the lion's share at 51%, and Colwood is second at 21%. CRD is in here, although apparently they're going to be in for 217, but they will be out for 218. We haven't heard that they have gotten approval from everybody else that they could leave for this budget year. And you can see, because our requisitions are based on assessed values, that Langford's increased by 81,000, whereas Colwood's years actually decreased by 1,635, and that's just because Langford's assessed values were proportionately higher. Yeah, so requisitions provide about 44% of our funding, and most recreation departments is 60 to 75% publicly funded. So we do a lot of our funding just from our own revenues. Here is the Variety bus, the new bus. We've got a couple of buses that have been sponsored by Variety. This is the newest one. So we received a $50,000 grant, or 50% of that was a $30,000 grant towards that bus. It's also accessible for, we have a lot of special needs kids that we pick up from different schools, and so that one is accessible. And the lower picture is of our playground, which is down by the picnic shelter, which is our newest playground. It was funded a lot from Rotary. Here are some stats, and these ones are, it's just a snapshot. It's things that we can easily monitor. There's lots of other uses that we don't have stats on, like all the soccer players and baseball players and hockey players that use our site. And you can see that they have decreased by municipality. Langford was the biggest decrease, and of course, they have the preferential Y pass. But there were a decrease in the others as well. So from 12,000 down to 9,500. This is our new equipment. It's called the Queen X. It's the adult playground. It's in the same room as our spin bikes. I don't know if any of you have gone to have a look at it, but it is one of the largest, I think it is the largest in North America. We're one of 3 in BC. It is a very, uses your functional movements, so it is good for people of very low fitness level to the very highest fitness level, because you can, by the way you use it and the angle that you use, you can make it a really hard workout or a fairly not hard workout. So, but people who are using it are really enjoying it. Yeah, so if anybody wants to try it, you have to go for a bit of a orientation, and then you can use that. The other nice feature of this is it all collapses against the wall. So when they have it, this means that room can be used for all kinds of different things, which it is, jazzercise. So it can all be put against the wall and uses up very little space. These were just some program registrations. So those are, all of our preschool programs and just other programs that we offer. Again, you can see that we have declined a bit in our program registrations, and the largest decline is from Langford. Here's a couple of pictures. The top one is our pool, and then the lower one is our craft program at Centennial Center. So we actually have 3 off-site places: Centennial Center, our neighborhood learning center at Royal Bay School, and then also the Belmont one. Here are some stats, just again, the drop-ins. You can see the second aquatic lessons have really dropped, and that's one of the reasons the Y actually includes lessons in their memberships. But they're very different aquatic lessons. We're finding that we're now getting people coming back because the Y doesn't follow the Red Cross. You basically, they have a different levels that don't transfer really to the Red Cross levels. And also, you basically pick a time that you want to go to your kids to go to swimming lessons. So you could have a beginner kid as well as an intermediate and an advanced all in the same class. And some of the parents are finding their kids aren't moving along as quickly as they do in our Red Cross program, where you're by ability. Oh, there was our, what was that? Yeah, that was, that was our big, Alice Cooper in October at the Q Center. And we have the big Rock the Shores, of course, in the summer, and I think it's going to go this coming summer as well. And that is just taken outside the Royal Bay School, and that is our recreational leadership camp. And these teens take that camp, and then they are able to volunteer as summer camp helpers in our summer camp. So it provides them a really good training and experience. So the energy efficiency is one of the ways we decreased our utility bills. Was we installed over 5,000 LED lights inside the pool and inside the arena. So we have saved huge on our hydro bill, which has been really good news. And then also the heat reclamation project that I mentioned. But the next pictures show you the difference. So the ones on the left was the old lighting, and the ones on the right are with the new LED lighting. It's just amazing, the difference in the lighting, and then to also save on our hydro bill is just a win-win. And of course, we're working on doing our parking lot right now, so we'll save even more. Here's the average cost per person, and this is based on Stats Canada, so the 216 results had come out from the 215. So you can see where in 216, we actually provide service per person at a cost of $71.14, whereas in 2011, it was a bit higher at $71.94. So we actually are doing a more efficient job over those 5 years and providing that at a lower cost. And again, our assessments are done, or our requisitions are based on assessments, not population. And that's why we have the varying per person down. Colwood is gone a little bit up from 2011, but underneath the average. The highest, again, is Machosen, and I guess it's just the difference between higher values but lower population. Sometimes we've discussed, you know, oh, well, maybe we should go by population and not assess values, but Colwood actually would be, that would be a detriment to you. You'd pay more. And that was it. That's it. Any questions on any of this?
Thank you, Sue. With that, we'll open it up to the public. We've got a couple of Colwood residents. Absolutely.
Oh, sure.
Well, just, sorry, I guess just a name and address for the record. Yes, please. Yeah. Do these guys have to leave, Ian? If we're
Public questions?
Yeah.
for public questions? Sorry.
My only concern is that would there be any sort of discussion among the council
from the public, we're okay? Okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I'm Chris Wright, and I live on Marianne Crescent. My question is very simple. In your penultimate slide, you had a cost per person ratio.
Yeah.
Is that for users or for the total residents in Colwood? Thank you.
Yeah, total residents. It is based on population. Yeah, so we basically just use the population, and that's how we derive that, not by who actually uses the rec center.
So, thank you, Your Worship. As a follow-up on that, what is the cost per actual user? Because you showed a decline in users. Thank you.
So the users and the population of the residents of each municipality are different. Do you know what I mean? And we don't have all of the users. Like, we don't count the number of soccer players, the number of minor hockey players, the number of baseball players, tennis players, all that. So we don't actually have the numerics of everybody that's used our facility or our field. Does that help you?
Right,
We
so
don't
it's
have
easy.
that number.
It's easier to track
Yeah, we just,
pool memberships, gym memberships,
Exactly.
that sort of thing. But when you're taking into account sports teams and that sort of thing, that's where it gets a little
right.
more nebulous, I guess, is what
Yeah,
you're saying.
exactly. Or
Okay.
kids playing on the
Gotcha.
playground or that kind of thing. We don't track that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. We're kind of restricted from committee or council. So I would suggest then if committee does have any questions that we have your contact information and or we could filter them through our finance department as well, who could get us that information. Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next item under new business is the review of the 2016 actual financial results compared to budget, including special projects and capital projects.
If you can
Director.
just give us 1 minute, we're just going to switch some computers around here.
You betcha.
How much time?
Yeah.
It's a couple pages, the same as the one in the agenda package.
I'm hoping that's in the budget. We're going to get rid of the Escalades. We're getting rid of the Escalades and buying scooters.
All right. Are you guys ready?
Sure.
Perfect. Go for it.
So this is going to be a bit of a tag team effort between Jen and myself. So I always like to make sure that before we embark on setting the next year's budget, that we have a look and make sure how did we do with all the work that everyone invested in setting last year's budget. And it's nice to see that we're getting our budget closer and closer. It's pretty tight in terms of the actual to budget. And this also gives us a bit of a hint looking forward about where some of the priorities may be when we sit down with council next week and we start to look at our major projects and our special projects, because there's some things that didn't get done that maybe won't get done, period, or things that got started that we need to complete, etc. So the purpose of this review tonight is there's basically 3 sections here. In your packages, you have a summary, which is just a nice high-level 1 page, because not everybody wants to dive into those numbers. We'll try to make this as painless as possible. Then there's some details for those who enjoy getting into the details, and we will go through some of that. And then we'll have a look at where we wound up with our special projects, which are usually one-time costs that normally would be in your budget, but because they don't happen every year, we do pull them out separately to identify them. And then the final item will be the capital projects, what got done, what didn't. Okay, and then that will inform us for next week. So just to remind council, we do have 2 back-to-back budget meetings, which will be Wednesday and Thursday night. And when we set the agenda, we were looking at your calendars, which are very full, and it's always a bit of a juggle to try to pick a couple of nights where you haven't already, had meetings every other night. So we do our best to try to accommodate it, not saying it's going to work perfectly for everyone. So those will be our 2 heavier budget meetings, and staff right now are working very hard to pull together. We had a basically 4-hour staff meeting this afternoon to go through the projects and capital to try and do a bit of a diet, we'll call it, before we bring a list to council, so that this year there will be some prioritization and some consolidation, a little bit more. And we're also reviewing our core expenses, so that will be coming forward. So you will get that agenda. Because our meetings are not till Wednesday, Thursday, we'll be sending out that one big agenda probably on Friday, because we're quite pushed for time, but you'll have it in time for the weekend. Council meeting is on Monday night, and we're working very hard to prepare budget binders for you with a little bit of a twist this year. So what we're hoping to do is in each binder, we'll have a consolidation of every time we have a meeting like this, we'll actually put a copy of the agenda in there. So you actually have a nice condensed or consolidated version of the budget meetings in case you want to go back and refer to something. We won't necessarily put all the presentations in there like tonight, the West Shore Parks and Rec and that. But we will make sure it's consolidated. And I've also asked staff to do a little bit of reviewing for some nice pictures so that we can see what we did get done in 2016, and we'll incorporate a few of those into your budget binders. And then we'll be updating those after each meeting. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavor for what we're working on. A couple things that we're working with in terms of principles. We haven't got this finalized, but to give you a flavor of the amount of work and thought that's going in. The Consumer Price Index for Victoria this year was 2%. So, and we see that being reflected. Some things are more than that, such as hydro. Those of you, we all get our hydro bills. And that's going up 4.5% in April, so that will be a push there. Some of the other things that we can't control particularly well, the RCMP federal contract always exceeds the CPI, and the library contract this year also. So they're both in the 4.2% increases. So we'll have a bit of a summary on that, but just to give you a bit of a flavor for the work that is being done behind the scenes, and we'll be bringing that back for next week. So we're hoping to do what we did last year, which is in conjunction with the chair, we look at the agenda. We say to council members, we want to go for about 3 hours, or when people start to, they say they've had enough, we stop, and then we start the next evening with the rest of the agenda. So any questions? Otherwise, I'll dive in now, and we'll get going on this. Okay? So the one-page summary that you have, basically, very high level, shows our revenues budgeted at $20.5 million, I guess, for 2016, and they came in slightly lower at 19.9. That $500,000 difference is generally directly related to, did we do the many projects and capital acquisitions we were planning on doing? And if we didn't, then the funding will not be coming through related to those projects. Taxation revenues generally are bang on. We were a little bit lower than we would like to have been, because we do have about $100,000 there of revenue that I'm still working on in terms of the PILT that I referenced earlier. So I haven't lost sight of that. It's always difficult because I've been in a meeting with the federal folks, and I actually got them in the same room with BC Assessment and said, look, we need you to kind of work this out together. And so we have not lost sight of that goal. User fees. I think council is pretty, we will go into some detail, but I think high level, we've talked about that due to the growth in Colwood is driving additional building permit fees and all the other different things associated with that growth. Fines and penalties, we are a little bit under budget. I'm not surprised at that. We did back off on a somewhat draconian approach that was being employed here, which was if we didn't get the money in hand as of 4:30 on the tax deadline, BAMO, it was late. That was not what our other fellow municipalities did. Many people pay online, and they were giving them the benefit of the midnight cutoff. And a lot of people are deadline achievers, and so you'll see a bit of a drop there. But in terms of customer service and giving Colwood a little better reputation for being fair and transparent, people have appreciated that. Let me see. Investment income is, the reason it looks like that is we get, oh, I'm sorry. Government transfers, okay. So I did talk about that briefly, which is basically it's tied directly to our capital. I'm going to let Jenn perhaps give you a bit more gory details on some of these. Let me just see here. I've got a whole bunch of notes. Government transfers. So we were looking at, do you want me to do the detail? I was just thinking, well, how was I was going to do the high level, and then we were going to do the detail, if you don't mind. I just wanted to give you like the big picture, because I kind of watch your eyes. Certain people, if they start to glaze over, then I know you've probably had enough, and then we'll try and skip quickly over into the details. No. But there's reason for that. So where you see that that's not been coming in, there's other things that are under budget to compensate for that. And let's have a boo here. It's generally pretty good news, actually, this year. I have managed to mix up my papers. Here we go. Developer contributions. I did want to highlight that one because we did budget for a certain amount from our different developments. That would be your amenity reserve contributions, affordable housing contributions, and we greatly exceeded budget. You know, we budgeted 600 and 920 came in, and we're seeing some similar trends as we're doing our forecasting right now that we'll be bringing forward. And it was, I always like to lead off these budget sessions with a presentation from BC Assessment, because with the amount of growth that's happening, it is definitely going to be impacting our budget projections in a happy way this year with the amount of market change that we've seen. Key figure, I think probably a lot of you heard tonight, was just over $101 million of new construction, and that will give us permanent asset tax base in addition to it. And so we are looking at some projections there. It's always hard to know exactly. We're going to be pretty conservative, but we'll be doing that much at least again. And that will drive additional user fees, like your building permits. It will drive additional developer contributions. So I'm trying to relate what happened last year with what we're looking at coming down the road for this year. So that's the very high level look at revenue. And we will have to do some breakdown in the detailed section on our government services. Suffice it to say, when we look at our total expenses where we budgeted just over 17 million, and they came in about 700,000 less. Projects are included in this one? Yeah. So one of the reasons that we're under there is we did roll up all the special projects that we spent a lot of time looking at last year. They are included in these expenses, and if we don't get those projects done, that also drives that $700,000 being under budget. And we'll look at that when we get to the projects separately. Debt proceeds, we did budget, this was the borrowing, which we did do. We consolidated all the borrowing that had been sitting there for about 15 years, and we do have the money now to complete the construction of Colwood Central, the main trunk line, and the pump station. Thank you. There's been a small amount of work done, 75,000, so the bulk of that we're expecting to have that completed in 2017. Transfers from reserves, I don't know if those have all been entered yet, Jen. Yep, okay. Okay. So when we transfer money from our reserves, it's generally to fund some of our asset purchases. And if we haven't done all of those purchases, which we did not do, that means that we've drawn down our reserves a little bit less. That's actually kind of good news, because one of the key items I'll be bringing forward for your consideration, I call them the piggy banks, but it's our different sources of revenue, so what's in our different reserves. So Jen has been working like a superwoman over here to do year-end entries. They need to be done for year-end, but we need them done when we go into budget. So we have accurate starting figures of how much money do we have in those different reserve funds, and how much money do we have in what we call our deferred revenue accounts. So that's gas tax, where we get the money but we haven't spent it yet, so we defer it till we need it. And that's things like road DCCs. So gas tax, we get about 700,000 every year. Road DCCs, we're looking at a major increase in 2017, again driven by the development. So the fact we haven't drawn down our reserves, we're happy about that. Debt repayment, we saved some money this year. We rolled over a number of our equipment leases into long-term debt, and that was a lower interest rate than we'd been paying when they were leased. And we also paid off one issue 75, one debt. As we get into the details of the budget, you'll hear us referencing the fact that, yes, our total debt payments have gone up this year because we're now starting to repay the big $2.4 million that we just borrowed. But the good news is in 2018, we have two debt issues on Colwood South and West, which will be paid off. So that decreases our debt payments again. So happy to do that, because when our auditor comes and presents to you, one of the key things he talks about every year is what's our debt. And we knew we had to borrow that money for Colwood Central, so this year it's not going to look as good. We know we've increased, but we do have a plan, and one of the more important things as we go through is what kind of shape are our reserves in, and what kind of a plan do we have to replace that. So so we talked about the debt repayments being a little bit under. That's a good thing. And the transfers to reserves are actually above, and that's very good, because if we hadn't had a good year, we wouldn't have been able to put the money back as we had planned. So for example, Jen's just made some of those planned entries. So like the fire department, they have a fleet replacement reserve. We try to put $225,000 a year in there. We were able to do that, thank goodness, because we just had a meeting this afternoon with fire chief needing a new engine replacement. And by being prudent, I think we will, in 2 years' time, have the money we need to pay for it without having to go out and borrow the money. So just to give you some examples, I'm trying to relate what we've done here with what we're planning, and needing that fiscal discipline as well to say, we do need to try and use those reserves. And as we get more and more into asset management, we do it now, but we're going to be doing it in a more formal way. And we'll get into, I think, a bit more detail on the reserves, but I just wanted to explain what was going on there. So why our government transfers were under, which we talked about way up at the top there, is we planned on spending $2 million capital purchases, and we spent 900,000. We've got a detailed list on that. So that's one of the reasons that we haven't had the revenue coming in and we haven't drawn down our reserves as planned. The sewer, that is related to the Lagoon Pump Station and the Colwood Central. So we know that, we've tendered that project and the bills are just starting to roll in now. So that's why that's under. So that's my high-level review with absolutely no notes. How did I do? It's been a bit of a day. So, Jen, do you want to just have a look? So at this point now, I'll let Jen, she's done a lot of work on the detail. And, yeah.
Yep. So, under government transfers, grants,
Yep.
where do I find PILT? Is PILT under taxation? Because I
Yes.
was thinking PILT was under government transfers.
It's under taxation.
It's under taxation, not grants.
Yeah.
Okay, even though it is kind of a grant.
They used to refer to PILT as a grant, and it's a payment in lieu of tax. So
Yeah.
we try really hard not to use the word grant with tax.
That's what was throwing me off in the $1 million thing. So I understand that we just didn't spend the money.
Yeah.
So can you please also give me a definition of debt proceeds, please, under additions? Because I don't understand what debt proceeds are.
So our financial plan, basically every item that we want to spend, we need a funding source in order to do so. So Colwood Central, the funding source, was the long-term debt proceeds. So you probably remember we had to go out and get another loan authorization bylaw to get the final borrowing piece that we incurred. And we incurred that last year. So we went to long-term debt through the spring issue. But it took some time to get the RFP out, and then we weren't successful the first time, so we did a second RFP. And so the debt proceeds are recognized as the funding source for the capital expenditure on the central LAS expansion. And that work has, for the most part, been deferred to 2017.
It's what we borrowed.
It's what we've borrowed, exactly. So it's the funding source for the project, and then we'll repay that borrowing with taxation, specifically parcel taxation for the central LAS area.
And then my final question is, your surplus deficit unaudited number of $754,000, where are you getting that number from?
So simply put, that is the difference between your revenue and your additions minus your expenses and your deductions. So when we sit down and we put together a financial plan, that figure has to be zero. Everything that comes in needs to go somewhere. We either spend it on expenses, we spend it on capital projects, or we put it aside into reserves. But then in actuality, things change. So we can speak to that high level right now.
Well, no, it's all right, as long as I was understanding it, because what I was trying to do was I was trying to take it off of budget. I was thinking it was a surplus debit off of budget versus actual, but it's not. It's actual. The surplus is based on the actuals.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just, if you look there, our big check to make sure, we've just done a major chart of accounts conversion, which has been huge. That's the other thing that's been really pushing us to get to the budget. The 2016 budget does come to zero on your front page, and that's when we did a few high fives and high kicks going, yes, we got everything included, because there's thousands of accounts in here. So that's your check to know that we've got it. So I don't know how much more detail you folks would like. I can just keep going on the detail, and then Jen can back me up for any tough questions. Okay, because I know that she has two small children, and they often bring home various plagues from daycare, and right now nobody is well, including Jen, I don't think, in the household. So I'll see how long I can get going before I can't answer a question. Don't take that as a challenge, though, please. We're tired. Under revenue, then, so we talked about the taxation, and you'll see there that's where the payments in lieu of are showing up. Nothing too exciting there. We're pretty much bang on, with the exception of the PILT revenues. The user fees, I find this actually quite exciting. I obviously need to get out more, but the user revenue being $167,000 over budget. I am dwelling on that because last year we did increase our budgeted amounts for a lot of these permits, and we increased them substantially, whether it was building permits, rezoning, variance permits, whatever. And we are looking at that area going up substantially again this year. We will be watching that carefully because we will be recommending some staffing to deal with the workload. But the flip side to that is this does not go forever. And so if that activity drops off, then we would look at a layoff like this. We're going to build some flexibility in there that we hire as we need to deal with this huge development push, because it's especially in the building department. But if this drops off, then we will respond to that. So that's kind of the user fees. The building permit fees in particular, I would like to highlight because we took those up a fair bit to $623. We came in at $672. And from what we're looking at with the major developments that are going on, Royal Bay and Awney in particular, and we have a huge list that we go through and we go over it with a fine-tooth comb with pretty much everybody in the room, because it is a bit of a crystal ball gazing exercise. We want to get it right, not be overly optimistic. We're looking at well over $1 million just in building permit revenues in 2017. Let's just have a look here. Fines and penalties. I don't think there's anything there that we haven't touched on, so I'm going to move on to the next page.
Sorry,
Yep.
just one I don't know. Franchise fees?
Yeah, that's Fortis Gas. This is something new and exciting, because last year we only got 50% of the revenue. This year, in 2017, we're going to be getting the full amount of the revenue. And last year, I think it was around $30,000. Yeah, shy of 20. Anyways, it's 63,000, I believe, this year. So this is good. And are you aware that's the it's 3% of their revenues for gas that was sold in Colwood. So that's for the lines going through Colwood. So that's good. And with a cold winter, might be even higher.
Love it when Colwood residents have gas.
Yeah.
Literally.
Okay, so
This is sad.
government transfers, there's a bit of a breakdown here on the second page of your details. Talks about the conditional grant and the unconditional grant. So the unconditional one, I think those of you who've been on council for a while, you're pretty familiar with the Small Communities Grant and the Traffic Fine Revenues Grant. And included in there is approximately $300,000 of casino revenue. So that's what makes up those figures. And then the conditional grant, we do rely very heavily on gas tax funding for projects and capital. And we don't always get them done, which is always a mixed blessing, because it's like, well, at least we have the money for next year when we sit down to do budget. But I believe we drew it down by 500,000, not the 1.4 that was planned. So that's the biggest reason for that difference. The year-end accounting is not yet done to take the 182,000 in interest, and we actually are required by law, especially by the gas tax folks, to accrue that interest to, say, the money that we have for gas tax, which is well over $2.5 million. So we have to accrue some interest on that and report that annually to the gas tax representatives. At the end of the day, the amount we usually recognize in the operating budget is around $40,000.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, could you clarify that for me? So, does the government give us the gas tax even though we don't spend it?
Yes.
So we have it in a bank somewhere.
Yes.
And sorry, when you mentioned about the interest, do we get to keep the interest?
Yeah.
Or do we have to report it and give it back to them?
No, we keep it, but
keep
we
it.
do have to report on it.
And why do they care that about the interest? Like, is there? I guess I'm just asking. Are we worried that we're going to lose future gas tax because they'll offset what we earned in interest? Like, should we be trying to get out there and spend that money as quickly as possible so that we don't lose our envelope of how much money we're going to get in the future?
So I was at a gas tax meeting last spring, I guess, and that question came up because we rolled into a new gas tax agreement about a year ago, I guess. Yeah. And the understanding is no, we don't. It's not use it or lose it. But the new hook is going to be thou shalt have an asset management in place within the next year or two, or you won't continue to receive your gas tax money. So that is the new twist on that. Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I can, I know one of the other concerns was that the gas tax money be used like a trust account. So if there was no restrictions on the interest revenue, then people would just squirrel away all of their gas tax money, and then they'd take the interest revenue and dump it into general revenue and spend it on what I'm going to say unauthorized categories, which because the gas tax does have limitations on how it can be spent, so the interest has to go back into that same pool of restricted projects.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you for that, Ian. Yeah.
Thank you. So, let's see, where were we? Finer points of gas tax, conditional grants, investment income, developer contributions. A little bit of detail there about what we budgeted for last year, what we actually received. So I think I've covered that. So that pretty much gets us down to our total revenue versus budget. So far, so good, are we?
Yes, and I just want to make sure we're not excluding Chris in case he had any questions, any burning questions up to now. Or public, well, attentive public. Okay, yeah, sounds good. Thank you. Fair enough. Okay, keep going.
Keep going. All righty. So, expenses. So we talked about the fact that expenses generally are under budget by, I think it was around 700,000 or something. Yeah, 690. So this is a bit of a breakdown because when we go through budget next week, we do go through it by department, not line by line, but just so you can see what's going on. And I don't have a lot of details here in terms of these are the numbers. Jen, did you have some more? Yeah.
So one thing we will mention is we haven't yet recorded amortization expense, which I think benefits us because we don't budget for it. So that's what happens when we present our financial statements. Our expenses appear over budget. So that hasn't been recorded yet. With the general government core services, the corporate core services are under budget, and that's primarily related to being under budget in both our consulting and our legal budgets. Council under budget, directly related to being under budget on training and conferences. Administration, again, relates directly to being under budget on training and staff overtime. The communications core budget, slightly under budget on both the advertising and the Colwood connection budget. The finance core, we're under budget, and that's directly related to one of our positions. We are recovering. That position's on a leave to the QP union, right. And we are recovering that full salary, and we only had that position partially filled and at a lower salary rate. So we were seeing a much higher cost recovery than we had budgeted for. HR under budget related to workstation costs, first aid supplies, and medical test costs all coming in under budget. And then IT, that's directly related to being under budget on our repair and maintenance and our support budget. Should we just jump down to protective?
Yep, keep going.
Okay.
Or do you have a...
Well, I'm trying, sorry, forgive me. I'm trying to reconcile, I'm going back to page 1, if you don't mind, for me. Sorry. I know this drives you guys crazy, but I'm trying to reconcile. So if I'm looking at, I understand that we did not utilize the $1 million in grants. I understand that. So I understand that's not a real loss, right? Because it's money that's sitting there. So if I did all this math, though, that would basically show us that we're at a $500,000 deficit in budget compared to actual when I look at through all these numbers. But when I look at your expenses, I actually see that we're up. We spent like close to $500,000 under.
The majority of the budgeted gas tax funding was for below the line for capital expenditures.
Yeah.
So that's why you're not seeing it in the expenses. One thing to keep in mind is on the summary, all the expenses, it's showing the total of both our core expenses and our special projects. And then in the detail, we have a few pages, page 3, page 4, page 5, that's all the detail just for the core. And then page 6 and page 7 is the detail for the special project expenses. So the sum of those
I got
two
it.
will
I
give
understand
you
what you're
your totals on the expenses summary on page 1 there.
Right on. Thank you. I'll try not to let him bother you again.
I'll be quiet.
Thanks, Jen.
Want me to have a go?
Yeah. Okay, so jumping over to protective services, the fiscal line there, that relates to one of our long-term issues, issue 105. And prior to our chart of accounts conversion, we used to just record that expense all to one GL account, which all got reported here. Next week when we get into budget, that figure, the 300, will drop substantially because the majority of that interest expense relates to our fire hall debt and 4 of our fire hall fleet items. So there's that. Sorry, the majority actually relates to engineering items, the Whale Road and the Nob Hill intersection, and then also the debt we incurred for the Bear Mountain Arena. And we do receive recovery for the Bear Mountain Arena debt up under contributions. That's the West Shore Parks and Rec. We get a debt subsidy for 50%. So that's the fiscal. And as Andrea had mentioned earlier, the reason that we're seeing a decrease over budget is because we rolled all of our leases over to equipment financing loans, and we are realizing a lower interest rate on those.
Jen, the debt assistance we're getting on the Bear Mountain / Q Center, is that the Langford contribution? Or
No, this is the West Shore Parks and Rec Society contribution. Up until a few years ago, we were receiving debt subsidies from both the City of Langford and West Shore Parks and Rec. Langford ceased their contribution a few years ago.
Yes.
Right. The RCMP line item being under budget, that directly relates to their salaries budget. And also we haven't yet accrued for the West Shore Detachment, the police building, their building costs. We're still waiting on that information from the City of Langford.
I'd just like to add a note there too, because some of you may have heard who are, say, on the Protective Services Committee, that we are looking at potentially some wage increases that could add up. And so we did just get a heads up from the federal representatives, and we fortunately had a little bit of leeway we were under budget in our federal RCMP contract, which is around $2.7 million. So we had about $100,000 there that we were under. So prudent financial management, we have managed to accrue the difference, like whatever we were under, and we've set that aside for the wage increase, because we've got it on good authority. It's going to be approximately $12,000 a member or whatever it was. So we have managed to accrue basically the amount for 15 and 16. So this is good news, so that when the bill does come and that settlement is finalized, it won't be a serious hit to the bottom line. Okay?
As long as they don't buy a new car.
That's a capital expense.
So moving to the fire department's core. The fire department's core expenses primarily relates to combination of their travel budget, their gear, their maintenance budgets, and a minor portion of their salary budget all being under budget. Bylaw, under budget, directly related to just being under budget on the maintenance and supplies related to their fleet. Animal control is bang on. Building inspections over budget, and that's directly related to being over budget on the salaries and benefits as part, really directly related to the busy year we've had. And then emergency preparedness, slightly under budget, and that was directly related to the Crest levy budget to actual variance. Now, solid waste management is a line item that we're seeing for the first time. Previously, these costs were within public works, transportation services, but this area, this represents all of the costs associated with the spring cleanup program, the branch drop-off program, your garbage collection program in the city and all the parks. And this variance here is just related to branch drop-off and garbage collection salaries being under budget.
If I could just put a plug in for good management from our public works manager, because we were able to keep some of those costs down instead of paying somebody to haul away the branches. We have a chipper. We've been doing some of our own chipping, and then we've been recycling those wood chips into the park. So we're seeing some savings all the way around there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Planning and development services, that budget variance again relates to salaries and benefits being under budget. I should mention on that note, on the whole, we still have the last couple of days of 2016 to accrue for, but the total impact is about $75,000, and that's on the entire operating budget. Okay, so now moving over to engineering, public works, and transportation services. The fiscal, the budget, and the actual is understated by the MFA issue 105 costs that need to be reallocated here. But again, those were virtually bang on. And the engineering core budget, that's directly related to salary costs being over budget for 2016. And the public works, I just have to say that's pretty bang on for a $2.2 million budget line item. But again, it's related to salary and benefit costs, actuals just occurring in other areas of the organization. And then moving over to the Parks, Rec, and Culture core budget.
Sorry, Jen.
Oh,
can I
yeah,
interrupt?
yeah.
Could you please explain fiscal one more time for us?
Sure. The fiscal it's your, used to be lease costs. We don't have any more leases after 2016. We've paid them all off and converted what we did have to equipment financing loans. So all the fiscal, it's interest costs on the debt.
Interest costs on
Yes.
the
Yeah, and just as a,
any time I see the word fiscal?
yes.
Like in any line?
Yes, and also our amortization gets recorded as fiscal.
Oh,
But
is amortization's built in there?
yeah, but we don't have any amortization in the city's budget because it's a non-cash item, and we haven't yet recorded it for the year. So what you're seeing is debt interest costs, and any debt interest costs in the city's general operating fund, we fund through general taxation, and then the debt interest costs in the sewer operating fund, those are all funded through your LAS parcel tax levies. And the majority of our debt is related to our sewer LAS areas. So the corporate Parks, Rec, and Culture line item, that relates to the Victoria Public Library and the West Shore Parks and Rec Society requisitions. And then the parks budget was just about bang on, and that's primarily related to public work time and materials and things maintaining the city's parks. So jumping over to sewer, the reason for the fiscal variance there was because we did move short-term debt over to spring issue, and our budget had just focused on the costs related to the spring issue, and we didn't capture the first 4 months of the year where we were paying interest on the short-term debt holdings. So now we no longer have any short-term debt related to our sewer LAS areas, which for years we had short-term that was long-term. So now it really is long-term. 15 years is short-term. And then the corporate coming in under budget, that's directly related to just not needing the legal budget that's in the sewer operating fund this year so far. And then public works was relatively close to budget, and again, just a reallocation of salary and benefit expenses to other activities in the organization. So right there, core expenses as of last week, so we still do have some, year-end accruals to record, but core expenses were under budget by $475,000, and that is directly related to the surplus that we're seeing in the general fund of $750,000.
I can give you a break, and we'll turn our attention now to special projects. So you've got a detailed listing there in front of you. And these are listing the various projects. I don't really want to read them all, but I'm thinking that you may have a few questions. I can highlight a few things that will be changing as we go into our budget going forward. So office renovations are a popular item, and they're ongoing here. We had a fairly spirited discussion about this in terms of to accommodate some of the either additional staffing or to make the groupings of existing staffing more logical. We've got a number of things we'll be reviewing with you, so they're not done by any means. Corporate communications events, their budget was 30, 20 was expended, and the communications manager budget in particular, that's been a bit of an evolving budget because it was a new position, and we continue to work on that budget. You'll see that it's increased quite substantially this year. Part of the reason is we've taken some of these things that were in projects and realized they are now part of the regular activities of that position. So like the events, they now have a core budget. It's been moved in there. So you'll see that budget jumping up to reflect that, for example. And the citizen survey is something we don't do it every year, or we'd put it in core. It's every couple of years. So Sandra's again planning on doing that. The waterfront branding and promotion, that has now been moved into core. So you'll see the core go up another approximately 20 or 24,000. I can't remember. But I think that's something that council has discussed, and I know Sandra has a number of council reports to back up some of her recommendations going forward on these things. It's kind of exciting, actually. So the rest of it in total then, general government special projects, 94,000 budgeted. We're a little bit under there. Protective services, the fire department needs to upgrade an alarm panel that they have, and this was not completed, and this will be coming forward to council, and it's been beefed up a little bit with what they're doing. So just a flag there that there's some of these things that are in progress. Another major item that's in progress is your official community plan, and we've just got the updated, the quotation was 180,000 approximately for this project. We've spent about 44,000, as you can see, to date. So we are carrying forward that, plus we've had to increase the budget to reflect the actual cost, because when we set our budget last year, we did not have that quote in hand. We had to pull a number out of the air and hope we were close. So we did the budget back in March or April, and then we got the quote in June.
Carol, you had a question?
Yeah, to our finance director. That one there reads land use bylaw?
Yes, it's both. It's OCP and land use bylaw. Yeah. I don't, can you help with that one? Does it flow out of the OCP?
The reason it didn't change was that it originally was a budget just for the land use bylaw, and then we added to it the OCP last year, and we just didn't change the titles. The 2017 budget will reflect OCP and land use.
Okay.
Just to know that it's included in there.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's a major ongoing project. Engineering, let's just have a look there. In total, we budgeted $158,000 and got about $58,000 done. And there's a number of things, some of them you'll see coming back. The risk mitigation, anything that has to do with safety, we're making sure that we put that as a priority and get back and get at it. I won't go into all of this because some things may not be continuing into the next year. This is why we had a staff meeting today going over this in detail. But you can see what did get done. The street light upgrades are something that we are now routinely doing, where we're replacing our, I think is it halogen lights with LED, similar to what we were hearing from West Shore Parks and Rec, significant energy savings. And we do get a bit of a grant, retrofitting grant for that. Subdivision development bylaw is very much in progress. Traffic count is things like speed reader boards, which we didn't do, but we're looking at doing a few more going forward. New DCC bylaw is definitely underway. Hydro box wrap didn't happen, not happening. And we got a grant for some age-friendly work, which has been completed, and a little bit of money in there for office furniture. So that kind of wraps up the engineering section of special projects. If I can keep marching along.
Keep going.
Yep.
Okay.
But it's not to finance. It's actually to our CAO. So, I mean, this type of thing I really struggle with, because I don't know how much of, like, if you look at, for example, engineering, and there's a 63% variance, does that mean 63% of the work didn't actually get done? Or does it mean that only 12% didn't get done, but everything else is in progress and is going to get finished? I guess I start looking at this, and I'm going, engineering, for an example, we budgeted $158,000. They only spent $58,000. I'm looking at two things. For example, the traffic count and the hydro box wrap was really, those are just things that staff should have just done. I mean, it's not like we budgeted the money to do it. And so I start questioning, why are we budgeting future stuff if staff don't have the ability or willingness to actually do the things that council's budgeting for them to do? So I'm going to pose that question.
There's no simple answer to this. Part of this is we have to have a budget before we can tender projects, and knowing full well that projects are going to span across fiscal years. So that's like an example of that is the DCC bylaw, the subdivision development bylaw. We can't actually tender or go out and get a quote because of the contract A, contract B language in procurement. So a lot of times we see a budget that's incomplete. So that's part of that number, that's part of that 63%. There's also, we budget for things almost like a contingency, so we may not have identified an area that we needed to do a traffic count this year, but we still had to have it in place in case we did, and it's probably something that really should be part of core. I don't know, I'd have to speak probably to the engineering staff a bit more about that, but quite often that's what happens. It ends up being a bit of a contingency, but there's also stuff here that just didn't get done, and you know, when I got here, I heard that was an issue.
Mm-hmm.
I've certainly heard it from staff as being an issue, and we're working on changing that. And one of the big discussions we had today as staff is, you know, how much of this are we going to actually get done? Should we just move it out into a future year? Because we know we're not getting stuff done.
I just want to pose the question, so you can take it back to staff.
Okay, Chris, you had some questions.
Through the chair, forgive my ignorance, but what does the acronym DCC stand for?
Development Cost Charges. So that's something that often is collected on new developments to help pay for the roads if they're in a predetermined area, which the bylaw would have set out, in this case, a number of years ago, so that when roads are built, I got that right, there's charges that are collected.
Yep. Okay, continue on.
Okay, so moving forward, engineering, public works, and transportation services. So it should be Parks, Rec, and Culture. You're right. Okay. What happened there? Heritage artifact storage and First Nations outreach. So we did complete the storage container. For those of you who look out behind the building, we got a new storage container out of here. That's what the money was spent on. We have not yet spent approximately 15,000 on the First Nations outreach, which our CAO advises we will definitely be spending this year, so we have got that in the budget. And it's one of those things, sometimes we are invoiced for it every second or third year. It's not always completely predictable. Wood chips, water fountain, got done on time, on budget type of thing. So I'm pleased to report that. And sewer services, the sewer treatment project, this is something that's been gone on for 3 years, and we're pleased to see that it's been finished, final, no more money being spent on that one. So special projects, you can see there we budgeted 571,000, and yes, we were under, and we've talked about various reasons, and that's it for special projects. If you like, we can move into capital now.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, next one is additions. Oh, yes, okay. Is that right, Jen? Page 6.
Yeah.
Do you want to take
Just mention that the special projects being under budget, that is not contributing to the estimated surplus of $750,000. Basically, any project that didn't get done, the funding wasn't recognized. And if that project was being funded by general tax dollars, we then transferred the unspent taxation into our reserve fund, just to make it a bit more visual as a funding source for future projects. Maybe just a comment quickly on the additions where we ended up. So the debt proceeds that entirely related to the Colwood Central LAS expansion, and we'll be recognizing the $2.3 million and change in 2017. The transfer from surplus is because that debt related to Colwood Central is outstanding. We are required to make interest payments on it and now principal starting in 2017, and we aren't yet taxing that area. So the city, basically we're using our surplus to finance those charges, and then we will fully recover the cost when we do start to levy the parcel tax in that area. And as Andrea mentioned before, the transfer from reserves was entirely used to fund special projects and capital projects, and that's why it's under budget. Just didn't complete as many as we'd planned.
Okay, so over the page, deductions, debt repayments, MFA long-term debt, a little bit under budget, and equipment financing. I think we've talked about both of these already. Okay, so I won't beat that one any further. It's nice to see a savings of $73,000. We like that. Transfers to reserves, the developer contributions, as we mentioned earlier, that we budgeted basically came in pretty much double what we had budgeted for. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
I wasn't sure if you could see from there, so.
There we go.
Very good. Okay, where were we here? So, yeah, contributions from developers. Sewer enhancement fees were under. Now, this is one of those ones that's hard to predict. The previous year we'd pulled in record numbers, so we had increased the budget, and then this year we didn't collect the same amount. And I'm sorry, I'm not in the engineering department in terms of the finer points of when we collect these enhancement fees. I do know in chatting with our lawyer about the actual costs of the Colwood Central pumping station. If, for instance, we don't have quite enough money, because we did decide how much money we wanted to borrow many years ago, that we are able to use our sewer enhancement fees as a backup source of revenue if we need it to enhance the capacity of the sewage pumping station. So I always like to have a couple of backup plans if the initial one isn't going to come through for us. Okay, so that's of some comfort there. Unspent special project taxation. So as Jen has mentioned, when we have planned on, let's see, this one was tax that we collected. Yeah, and you've put that over into transfers to reserves? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I thought I heard a
Go ahead.
question.
Nope.
Nope. Oh, okay. So I wanted to just focus on the fact that we planned on putting just under $1 million into reserves, and we've put 1.5 in. This will be very helpful when we come to do our budgeting next week to see where we're going to get the money from. Now, we're going to get into the big stuff here, which is our asset acquisitions. And I'm looking at the bottom of this sheet, and we're planning on spending just over $2 million. We spent about $890, so why did we spend that much less? I think this lays it out in fairly thorough detail. We did do a number of items in our IT department, and I'd like to give a shout out to Per Christensen, who's here tonight. Per has been very frugal in how he spends money and also very methodical in how he puts the budget together. So we now actually have a very good asset management plan as it relates to the IT department, and you'll see some monies that were in projects or capital rolling into the core budget, so that every year we're planning to replace, say, $25,000 worth of hardware. Things we had never budgeted before, but the bills would just pop up. We need a new switch, we need a new firewall, don't scare you, firewall.
That's
Bit of a difference in cost
That's
there.
coming.
I'll buy that for 25.
Yeah, exactly. What a deal. Sold.
Yeah.
And we've also rolled in what we're calling an evergreen program, so that instead of waiting till people's computers crash and burn, every year we have a plan to replace ones when they hit about 4 years old. So this, I'm very happy to report, asset management is happening on our fleet replacement topics and on our IT topics in particular. And we can see the benefits now, so we don't have these great big spikes in our expenditure patterns. Let's see here. Protective services. Good old T-Rex needed a camera that wasn't initially budgeted for, so that got purchased. There was some additional light bar and some equipment for the bylaw vehicle. The storage container came in under budget because we did have View Royal kick in some funding toward this, so that was good. And it cost a little bit less than we had planned. It didn't get finished, so we're bringing forward this project to finish it for 2017. In the engineering, public works, and transportation area, this is the area that's basically driving the majority of why we're under budget in our asset area. The numbers kind of speak for themselves. The transportation improvements, we had a fairly busy meeting this afternoon. This was one of the areas up for discussion of what we have the capacity to do with our resources, and that includes our financial resources, because there's some major things that need to be done, but we can't do it with our existing things, so we're going to have to come up with a plan there. Bridge and culvert repairs didn't get done, need to get done, and you will see that in the 2017 budget. I'm trying to hit on Councillor Martin's question earlier as we go, so I can identify the things that I know are going to happen. Park improvements basically got done, and they will continue to need to be done as we grow our parks and wish to improve them. One of the funding sources for that, I'm happy to report, is our community amenity reserve, which will be very helpful. Public Works, give them a budget. Those boys go out and get her done, we might say, and they get it done basically on budget. So you'll see there was several pieces of equipment that got purchased basically right on budget. And they've even been known to recycle pieces of vehicles and combine them into new ones and save us from buying a whole new vehicle. We appreciate that. Pickup truck, equipment shed. The generator did not get bought. Again, we had a very interesting conversation about that today, and now that Public Works Manager is looking after it, I do believe it will get done. In 2017, it is definitely on the list for something to do, and your CAO did provide direction that we want to make sure that if at some point we need to actually pick it up and move it, that we would be able to do that. So that's kind of the story on that department. Parks, Rec, and Culture, the water park, a great deal got done. There's more to be done. This is one area where I don't think we had an appropriate amount of budget, and I'm not sure that it was set particularly scientifically, so we're doing some more work on that one. Painter Trail, this is a success story. I'm trying to round up a few photos just to remind us that was a very successful project, and full credit to our Public Works Department who did pull themselves off other jobs. You'll see that where we were under budget, but it means that some other projects like road work may not have got done, or shoulder work or whatever, drainage, but that project got done and got done under budget. So that's where we wound up with capital.
Okay. Rob?
I don't mean to flog a dead horse, and Andrea, you already brought it up. But again, through the chair, to our CAO, sorry, if I'm looking at this budget and I'm looking at engineering and they didn't do the transportation improvements, and I understand why they didn't do the bridge, because the bridge, we're waiting until it does need to get fixed. But I'm looking at this budget and I'm going, what did they do this year? Like, from a special project standpoint. And my secondary concern is it's fine that we didn't spend the money and it gets pushed back a year, but it also means the projects that we were hoping to get done this year will get pushed back again further and further and further. So this number actually, even though it's a positive because we didn't spend the cash, is a real upsetting thing for a person sitting here in this chair in council. And it's like, I mean, that's just, in my estimation, isn't acceptable. I mean, that nothing happened. I'm just throwing that out, and I'm not looking for you to defend it. And I also know that we also ran into issues with our engineering department this year. So, you know, I'm more than willing to just step back from that. But this is the numbers. This is the story that these numbers tell me.
I'm actually really glad you did bring that up, because there is one particular project that we need to have a really tough discussion about when we get into discussing the 2017 budget, and it's the $455,000 in Machosen Road improvements. So that's the largest single chunk of that $1 million that we didn't spend. We didn't spend it because we actually need $850,000, not $450,000. So it was I'm going to say a mistake in terms of knowing what the extent of that project was going to be. And so we're coming back to council at 2017 saying we need $850,000 to do that project, and if you still want to do it, we'll proceed with doing it. But we couldn't even start that project because we just didn't have the budget to do it. You know, that's part of it, but the rest of it you've yeah. And you know, we know that's a problem. We've known it for years, and hopefully we are going to get a better grip on that in this year's budget, and better again in 2018, and we'll go from there. The other problem, and I just want to last one, is sometimes we budget for projects that require senior government funding. So the conditional grants component. So we'll say, okay, we're going to do Acme Road, and Acme Road is $1 million project, and $400,000 of it is provincial and federal grant funding. If we don't get the provincial and federal grant funding, it just doesn't happen. So you'll always see, particularly in engineering, because that's generally where the big grant-funded projects are, you'll always inevitably see some level of projects not done, and it's because they're reliant on senior grants.
Cynthia?
Yeah, so I just was going to say that I believe that when we first envisioned doing that project on Machosen Road, we did have a grant for a good portion of it. So I think the grant got transferred to a different area, and I can't quite remember where it got transferred.
Yeah, Island Highway.
Okay.
Silk Road.
So I was just going to speak to that. The projects have kind of morphed to us switching where we could get the best bang for our buck. So it doesn't always show up in our budget, and that is, I think, a discussion we need to have to determine what's achievable and where's our best bang for our buck for the safety of our cyclists, pedestrians, and everybody. And certainly Machosen Road is an area that I've been hearing a lot about in terms of safety issues.
Yeah, and I think to go along with that, I think what rubs me probably a little bit the wrong way with the Machosen Road upgrade is that we did a lot of public outreach, and I attended a public meeting and got a lot of input, and there were some commitments made, and then nothing has come to fruition. So now we're getting some feedback, like what the hell's going on. And so perhaps we haven't done a good job. Like we've done a good job in doing the outreach, but we haven't done a good job in terms of updating following through, but at least updating the residents to say, okay, it's not moving forward because X, Y, and Z. I think that, and that's one thing that rubs me a little bit. We just need to let our residents know that here's the reasons why it's been delayed, and I think they would understand, but the not knowing is not doing anything for us. But
That's why I try and stay away from public engagement.
yeah. Anyways. Yeah. Continue on, please.
Okay. Where were we? I think we're just about done. Yeah, we're into the home stretch here. So, sewer? We're always in the sewers. We are, because it's where we spend most of our money, right? So we've already, I think, touched on most of this, the sewer expansion, or the 2.4. We're now executing it this year, and it is getting done. You can drive by and see it getting done. Yeah. The pump station protection and relocation, now this 310,000 initially was set at that figure, and we didn't spend it because I think part of that was the initial proposal from the engineer of the day was to armor that station. Do you want to speak to that? Thanks.
Through the chair, first I just want to say on the sewer expansion, we would have been further along on that. The first time we tendered it, we got no responses.
Yeah.
So we re-tendered, anticipating doing it during the non-construction season, which is right now, and that's how we managed to get some competitive bids. The pump station originally was armoring the beach and the pump station permanently, and mid-budget discussions last year, we shifted course and recommended the council to just do some temporary work and use the funds to do a better study on where we could relocate that pump. And so that part of that project is ongoing, and we're still anticipating moving the pump station to a different, more secure place that won't be a threat to rising sea levels. So that's ongoing, and that's why it hasn't been all spent.
And so I think we're just about ready to wrap up.
Sorry, I have a question on sewers. Believe it or not. Yeah, Chair?
Councillor Martin on sewers.
Thank you. Pump installation, Matilda and Isla. My understanding was there were 5, I think, homes that were contributing $5,000 each to offset some of that cost, and I'm wondering, where does that money get reflected into that? Because I know the reason we knew initially that the budget was going to be $65,000, but then what we said was, okay, their money plus our $30,000, we should be even. So I'm just wondering, is the money that we receive from those homes in our income, or did we never collect it?
We'll confirm and get back to you.
Okay.
I know we collected some of it because I remember being involved and speaking with Michael with respect to one property that did contribute.
Right.
But let us confirm.
Well,
exactly.
and I guess just from a budgeting standpoint, how does that get reflected so that it doesn't show that, like, because sometimes, like, if I was looking at this not knowing anything, I go, okay, you guys budgeted 30, you spent 65. It looks like you guys were really horrible at managing that program because you guys went 100% over budget when we didn't go over budget at all.
Yeah, no, ideally you budget the full cost of the program and then the full funding sources. So
Right.
you'd show the 65,000, and then you'd show, your surplus or the other contributions from the residents.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Okay, I guess,
So I think we're ready to wrap up. I would like to say, if it's of some comfort, we are bringing more rigor to the budget process. The longer that we have the same people in your management chairs, it's very helpful. We're very thankful to have CAO on board. I think going forward, I've seen some real improvements already in terms of how we budget, working together as a team, and we have much better financial statements coming out of the new chart of accounts. What you've seen this evening, this is the same format that you'll see going into budget. So we've regrouped the accounts a little bit differently. You'll see a workbook called Parks, Recreation, and Culture, for example. So within there, you'll see the library, West Shore, and then our parks. Okay. So we'll carry on next week.
excellent. Thank you. Any further questions before we wrap it up? You're okay? He tends to do that. No offense, but it's a habit. Next meeting is Wednesday, March the 1st, 5:30. Can I have a motion to adjourn? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.